Okay, so I see Will, I see Kate. I know others are supposed to join. They can catch up as they get here. Welcome to day 3. This is the third workshop of 5 for the Chancellor's Faculty Innovation Workshop Series. Today's focus will be on ideation. And again, my name is Liz. I think at this point we've spent a lot of time together, both in these synchronous sessions and asynchronously, so you all know who I am. As a review, the workshop is designed so that faculty can learn more about design thinking mindsets, processes, and tools, actually start to apply these different pieces to specific challenges or problems of interest in your own work, and then connect with other faculty across campus and other innovation and entrepreneurship experts in our ecosystem, and several are on today's call. And so a review of the workshop arc. This is again the third of 5 workshops. We framed our design challenges. You all started to do some inspiration activities, including extremes and mainstreams last week. Today we're moving into ideation, so creating choices and making choices. Next week we'll focus on implementation and then launch you into pathways to impact and further connect you with innovation and entrepreneurship experts on campus. And so today's agenda, again, 1 hour worth of content. We're going to start with One Thing, 9 Ways, recap design thinking and the ideation phase more specifically, and then tee up 2 activities that you all will do in the next week. So the first one is journey mapping, and then the second one is a set of activities designed to have you think through what to prototype. So again, for housekeeping, for those of you who are part of the workshop series, we would like you to ask questions as we go, so feel free to type into the chat or unmute yourself and to turn on your cameras. And as always, I'll send a summary email with next steps and then the PDF versions of the slides. And so we will warm up with One Thing, 9 Ways. So individually, we'll ask you to grab an object from your desk or home, so something within reach. It can be a pencil, an apple, a roll of tape, etc. And we're going to give you 3 minutes to list 9 uses for this particular object. And then as a group, we are going to go through and share those 9 uses. And so again, the instructions are you're going to spend 3 minutes grabbing an object from your desk or home. Anything works, and you're going to list 9 uses for this particular object. And you will have 3 minutes to brainstorm uses starting now. One more minute. time. All right, so 3 minutes goes by fast, especially if you are brainstorming and generating lots of different ideas. And so would love to hear from Kate, Will, Carmina, those of you who've joined, what item you picked, and then as many ideas as you came up with.
All right, this is a mason jar. I have drinking glass, long-term food storage, pen, pencil holder, flower vase, pressure point foot massager, fill with dry ingredients and give as a gift, cover and poke holes in the top, store lightning bugs, smash and use as a filler for bottom of a planter, and grow microgreens.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks.
Will or Carmina?
Go
ahead.
Oh, sorry. I also had a cup, so I had some similar ones to Kate. The drinking vessel for water, pencil holder, could use it to hold herbs, use it to water plants, a cookie cutter, you could draw around it outside, and also to draw circles, could be a flower vase, and also for printmaking if you put it on paint and then print on something else.
Thanks, Carmina. Will?
Yeah, so this is a letter opener I bought at a castle in England. All right, so it's a letter opener, can be used as a stabbing weapon. It could be a prop at a puppet show. It could be a paperweight. It could be a nail cleaner. It could be a prop to help folks, for artists, for designing or drawing swords. It could be a teacup stirrer. It could be an appetizer stabber. And it could also be a kid's toy.
Thank you for demoing it as you were describing all the potential uses. All right, and so wanted to start off with this quick activity because we know that as we facilitate with team members activities that are supposed to lead to generating different kinds of ideas, that warm-ups are often really helpful so that people can change their headspace and start to think creatively in a short way like this and separate potentially from whatever your topic of the day is, and then have them get into that mindset before actually asking them to come up with ideas related to your projects. And so wanted to give you all some practice with this short activity. And so quick recap of design thinking before we go into some of the newer content for today. Again, design thinking is a human-centered approach to problem solving and innovation. And here at Innovate Carolina, we are talking about IDEO's version of design thinking as a set of mindsets, a method and a process that's replicable, and then also a set of tools and activities. And so design thinking is great because it forces us to think through 3 different buckets. So desirability, feasibility, and viability, looking for that sweet spot that overlaps all 3 for innovation. And there are many mindsets that we have touched upon as we've gone through some of this content. And today we're really going to hit on make it and learn from failure. So knowing that we need to really test real ideas in the real world with people often and test multiple ideas so that we can learn from what works and doesn't work and then iterate on that to make things better. And then again, a high level look at the process. There's 3 phases. Last week we covered inspiration, this week ideation, next week implementation. And in this linear graphic, it looks very nice left to right, going from one phase to the other, knowing that we can go back and forth between these. Inspiration, getting to know our end users and their experiences and what they want and need and potential solutions. Ideation today, focusing on creating and making choices and testing multiple options. And then next week, we'll focus on implementation. Once you have a solid idea of the 1 or 2 ideas you want to move forward into the real world, how might you translate your ideas into practice and actually collect real data in return to understand what's working and how to make it better. And then we've been guiding you towards using the Field Guide to Human-Centered Design put forth by IDEO. And they have both the PDF version that you can download, as well as the interactive website that walks you through all the different descriptions and then steps for the discrete methods. And so we've seen this slide before, but we know that design thinking is different from traditional problem solving because design thinking explicitly asks us to go backwards and further understand our users and the problem and the challenge much more before moving forward and testing multiple solutions and not just one. And so why focus on building design thinking skills? We want all of our faculty participants to develop deep understanding of the problem and focus on meeting genuine human needs, which requires us to understand our own biases and assumptions, to create space and time to explore multiple options, to place small bets fast through experimentation using a prototyping approach, and all the while emphasizing collaboration and diversity. And so with that, we're going to talk about ideation specifically today. So the purpose of this phase is to share what you've learned with team members up until this point, to make sense of a vast amount of data and identify opportunities for design. This phase is largely about creating choices or divergent thinking, and making choices, convergent thinking, and getting feedback from real people. And so I wanted to pause here and ask you all how you already do some of these things. And so I'll let you reread this and then reflect on how you already do some of these things on this slide.
So I suppose I do a lot of this in our research group meetings. So we have our graduate students that come together. We're dealing with vast amounts of data, both modeling and observation, and we're designing, engineering solutions, right? And so, what are the possible solutions, or the divergent thinking, and then coming on a solution that works for the problem at hand, the convergent thinking, and then the feedback's done as a group between myself and my fellow graduate students and postdocs.
Thanks, Will. Others?
I think similarly, in our research group meetings, hearing different voices about maybe what they've seen in the literature with respect to adolescent and young adults with cancer. We're just wrapping up. We've done a series of focus groups and interviews with adolescent and young adult cancer patients and survivors. And so that's, getting feedback from them. And we're in the phase where we're analyzing that, and we'll be discussing what we found with our team.
Thanks, Karina. Kate or Julie, do you want to add anything?
We've had some success, I think, in sort of large group large group brainstorming sessions through some of our research networks, which draw from a lot of different disciplines, and then also like smaller sort of roundtable discussions at conferences that are kind of like breakout discussions where we try to have representation of youth at the table, community organizations, educators, and healthcare providers. And so I guess kind of similar to what Carmina was saying, like trying to bring together a lot of different perspectives and give them a chance to vocalize on a even playing field.
So I have shared this with the exercise that we did last week with the extreme and the normal and the extreme. I shared that with my postdoc, and we went over it because he is working on the patch idea. And I thought that was super useful and helpful because I've never really thought in terms of, okay, what would be the extreme users, what would be the average users? And I actually like the way of that, the concept of that, because I guess everything that we make for the extreme users may also work for the normal users, and vice versa.
Great. Yeah, so it sounds like all of you have experience doing a lot of these pieces, and so wanted to add some additional methods to your toolkit for how you could think about this and then how you could continue to engage with your team members in these discussions. And so we will not have time to go through every single one of these, and we've specifically picked out 2 activities like we did last week to go further in depth with, but at least wanted to share the list of all of these and then remind you all that all of the descriptions and then the instructions for how you would accomplish these activities all are available in the PDF or the link that I keep including in each of the wrap-up emails every week. And so I encourage you to go through and spend a few minutes reading about a couple at a time, and then scheduling time for office hours to discuss any that you want to dive deeper into and or think through how to actually integrate into your work. But a lot of these activities are either divergent thinking, so again, thinking by yourself and or with others, teammates and users, about the vast ideas that you could implement, and then as well as convergent activities. So how do you take all of those ideas and make sense of them, and or look for themes or group them and then start to test them. And so with regards to an overview of divergent and convergent thinking, we talk about divergent thinking as creating choices and convergent thinking as making choices. And oftentimes in meetings or just in our everyday proceedings, we don't separate these two processes, which is truly a disservice. And then sometimes we don't have transparent processes for either. And so hopefully by the end of today, you'll see the purpose of separating these two processes and then some ideas for what processes you could use with your teams. So the purpose of divergent thinking is to explore in different directions, expand options, try new things, and take risks. It's the time to think about what's possible instead of only limiting yourself to what's feasible. And so in an in-person environment, we would ask for you to find somewhere with lots of floor space and whiteboards and use sticky notes and markers. In a virtual world like we are right now, we still ask you to find virtual whiteboards like our Google Jamboards and still use sticky notes and typing. And it's good to set some constraints. And so know that if you are entering a divergent thinking activity, that you have X amount of time to complete it, and that you have a specific challenge question that you are working to answer. And so some of the activities within divergent thinking include how might we's, which include taking the insights generated from your inspiration activities, so your lessons learned, flipping them and asking them as a question, deciding if the questions are too broad or too narrow, and then trying to brainstorm solutions and see what ideas come to mind and adjust if needed. So for an example, for my own work, I was doing some projects with teens in sex ed in schools. And so we knew that teens didn't want to learn sex ed in schools. It wasn't a great environment and they prefer to learn it elsewhere. And so here are some potential how might we questions from that insight. How might we provide sex education content to teens outside of school settings? There's a lot of options, so it might be a little too broad. How might we provide sex education content via smartphone apps to teens outside of school settings? That might be too narrow because it already prescribes that we're going to do this via smartphone app. So something in between might be how might we use technology to provide sex education content to teens ages 13 to 15 outside of school settings. And so with regards to the choreography, so the planning and intentionality behind doing activities like this, we recommend using warm-up activities like the 1 Thing, 9 Ways we started out with today. So you can switch people's mindsets if they were coming from a different meeting on an entirely different topic, or they weren't asked to think creatively and come up with lots of ideas, priming them for that by doing a warm-up, giving them the time constraints and the specific questions or focus area of the day, and then asking them to individually brainstorm and then follow that up with a group share and then a synthesis. And then the common tensions that we see during divergent thinking, typically we see early convergers, so folks who brainstorm ideas early and are pretty set that those are the ideas that they really like and they want to stick with. And it's harder to convince them to keep an open mind. We have a lot of judgment, so mostly judgment of our own ideas. So if you ask folks to brainstorm, many folks will sit there and you give them 3 minutes. It's not uncommon to see them wait until the last 30 seconds to put 1 or 2 ideas forth. And those are the ones that they've vetted on their own because they're looking to put forth really good ideas as opposed to going for numbers. And then other common tensions are safe ideas, because a lot of us don't like rejection and don't like being told that our ideas are silly or bad. And so oftentimes, without explicit brainstorming rules or guidance or practice, we still get a lot of safe ideas. And so ways to address these tensions: give teammates a heads up when you're going to be doing divergent thinking activities and preview the prompts if possible. This is helpful for those who like to process ahead of time and are more introverted. And then have a consistent, replicable process with clear expectations. And we will talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And so the 3 methods that we recommend are brainstorming, co-creation sessions, and role-playing. And on the right-hand side is a picture of the brainstorming rules that IDEO has put forth. And I really like these. They're easy to understand. And if you start to integrate this into your workflow, your teammates will start to practice this more and more if you consistently use these rules. So the first one is defer judgment of yourself and others in the ideas put forth. The second one is explicitly encouraging wild ideas. The third one, build on the ideas of others. Fourth, stay focused on the topic. 5, as you're sharing, 1 conversation at a time, so limiting side conversations. 6, be visual. So some of us like to process and think in words, but others of us like visuals, and so want to encourage that. And then this last one, which I think is one of the hardest, number 7, go for quantity. And so often, again, many of us self-censor and go for quality. However, ideation and divergent thinking in particular, it's really important for us to go for quantity and to look for and encourage creativity. And by going for quantity, it can generate further conversation about which of these are feasible versus not and why, or which of these seem sillier and more far-fetched and why. But in order for you to have those conversations, people do need to put forth a wide range of ideas so that you can continue to learn from them. So for co-creation sessions, we encourage you to include the people that you're designing with and for, and ask them to show you what they want. And so it sounds like each of you have had experiences working directly with end users at some level. And so one way you could do that is ask them a question and provide them with the materials, either physically or in a virtual space, for them to create. And then after you give them a prompt and ask them to create a solution for the problem that you describe, have them walk you through it and then follow up by probing on what they included and why. You can do this with the Jamboard, and it's really helpful to hear users describe solutions in their own words, because then you can understand the intention behind each of the different aspects they've drawn, but then also hear the words that they're using to essentially pitch the idea to you, because you might be able to tease out the value proposition or why this particular solution is better or really important compared to others. And so with my own app work with teens, we actually largely wrote our app store description in Apple after co-creation sessions, and heard from young people that what they really liked about the solutions that they were generating was that they felt like they weren't alone. And so it wasn't because they got more sex ed information and that it was more convenient, which were some of the reasons we thought that they might like this app. They really wanted to emphasize that this was a place to gather social support and to essentially pay it forward to other teens, to let them know that whatever they're going through, other people are going through too. And then role playing, and this is an example. This is a great way to make sure that you, especially after you've gone through some interviews, and you might not be able to always have members of your user and user group with you, but to make sure that you've considered different ideas and perspectives the best you can as you move forward. For our new COVID safety project at UNC, I'm working on a digital tool to crowdsource information on crowd density, mask wearing, and social distancing. And we have many different end users. So we anticipate creating a product or solution for UNC staff, faculty, students, UNC leadership, Chapel Hill business owners, Chapel Hill employees, and different community members. And so as our group thinks through the use cases, the barriers, the concerns, the unintended consequences, it's helpful for us to assign roles to different people as we go through some of these exercises to make sure that we are considering different perspectives. And then after that, also including real people and asking further questions to make sure that we're not just making these assumptions, but that we really are trying to make sure that we're not only considering one perspective. So again, it's helpful to brainstorm benefits, drawbacks, barriers, motivations, unintended consequences, etc., for each of these different end users. And so switching from divergent thinking, which again is creating lots and lots of choices, at some point you are going to have to start to whittle it down and make choices. And so convergence is a process that requires us to understand the essence of our ideas, so with that we can keep the most promising elements in play. And so with regards to the materials, again, we want space so that you can share different options in a way that everybody can see them, and then think through ways you might want to leverage voting, if that's how you would like to come to consensus or make decisions. And in a virtual environment, it's actually pretty great to have things like Google Jamboard that don't identify already, like this is Carmita's Post-it note, this one is Kate's Post-it note, and that you actually can generate lots of ideas and not have them attached to people. And then for these types of activities, you do want to have selection criteria for evaluating ideas. And some examples could be desirability, feasibility, or viability, or time-based, now, near, far. I'm confident we've all been in meetings where we've been asked to brainstorm ideas and then pick one path forward by the end of the meeting without a clear understanding of how we make the decision between the 10 to 15 ideas that were thrown out and the one that we're going to move forward with at the end of the meeting. And so with regards to the action steps and the planning behind these types of activities, we recommend discussing selection criteria, discussing the ideas, and then voting or making your decision. And so common tensions include groupthink. And so it's entirely possible that folks will gravitate towards the same idea and be less willing to think about others. Continue divergent thinking. And so again, we recommend that with your divergent thinking, it's time bound. And once you move into the next phase of convergent thinking, you try to honor that. But you will inevitably have team members who will continue to generate new ideas. And while that's great, we recommend that you have some sort of parking lot for them to put their ideas, but limit your discussion potentially to the ones that you've already decided that you were going to move forward in considering, so that especially if you are constrained by time, you're not spending time constantly going back and doing divergent thinking over and over again. And then bias convergence. And so based on the influencers of the group, typically related to power dynamics. And so a lot of folks might be more inclined to vote based on what your boss prefers or the idea that your boss put forth. And so in an in-person setting, we recommend numbering ideas to reference them during discussion and voting. So it's not Will's idea or Julie's idea, but this is idea number one, idea number two. And then with technology like Jamboards, it's actually even easier because they're not already tagged to names. And so we do like that aspect and encourage that you separate people from ideas to minimize the bias convergence. And so overall takeaways for recommendations: schedule a separate time for divergent versus convergent thinking whenever you can. And so it doesn't mean that it needs to be 2 different days. It just means that try to separate, this is the time allotted for divergent thinking. It's going to be followed by this amount of time for convergent thinking, and tease out that separation and the rationale behind separating it for your teammates. And then make sure that you do have clear criteria for making choices and decisions. And you aren't just asking people to pick the one they like most if that's really not what you're going for. Okay, and then a quick overview of some convergent thinking methods, bundling ideas, finding themes, creating insight statements, and then design principles. So after you've collected a bunch of different ideas, either through the inspiration phase or the divergent activities as part of ideation, it's time for you to look for some patterns. And so recommend that you group similar ideas together, and then you can go through and name those bundles. And then you can even bundle some of the individual bundles to form larger clusters. And so we can, if you have questions about that, happy to share examples outside of today. Finding themes. And so once you have like ideas placed near each other in some sort of fashion, it's really helpful to name the bundles and clusters with 2 or 3 words and answer some of these questions. Have any patterns emerged? What surprises you? What feels significant? How will we evaluate which ideas to move forward? What criteria will we use? From there, you can create insight statements. So you take the 2 to 3 word themes you identified and rephrase them as short statements that can stand alone about your users. And then pick 3 to 5 insight statements that are relevant to your challenge and offer a new perspective, and have those guide future divergent and convergent thinking activities. And then the last one, I do have an example that follows this one. For design principles, these are the guardrails for your solution and for your team. These are supposed to be quick and memorable recipes that will keep further iterations consistent and focused. They'll be aligned to your themes and insights. So you'll review themes and insights you generated from your earlier activities, consider the core principles underpinning those themes, and frame them as positive statements that guide how you will design solutions. And so for an example, IDEO.org a few years ago worked with the Bezos Family Foundation on a campaign to encourage low-income parents to engage early and often with their children. And so after going through inspiration, ideation activities, generating insight statements about parents, they synthesize all of that into 7 design principles for their design team. And so they included 1, we withhold judgment. They heard time and time again from parents that parents didn't want to feel like they were doing things wrong, or that they were being told very prescriptively how to raise their children and how to interact with them. So that was number 1. We speak in the voice of their peers. Parents told them that they didn't want to be lectured or have interventions coming from people who had greater perceived power but didn't know them. And so really wanted to have any intervention materials come from in the format of the voice of their peers. We aim for more and better, not most and best. And so a lot of their parents indicated that it was really frustrating when interventions and solutions made them feel like they weren't doing enough and that it was not attainable to reach the level of perfection that people wanted. And so that's why that one was there. We go where they are. A lot of parents also said that if any solution or intervention design needed to fit into their lifestyle and daily flow of activities, and that going to a brand new setting really far away for any sort of intervention or solution was not desirable and not feasible. 5, we celebrate the identities they embrace. And so many parents self-identified as single parents, or there were other aspects of their identity besides just parent that they wanted celebrated. And so making sure that content was, 1, celebrating the different identities, and 2, that it matched whatever identity that they self-identified as. 6, we're not afraid to talk about science. We heard from parents that they actually wanted a lot of factual information. And then IDEO did number 7, we don't forget the kids. And so while their end users were parents in this case, many parents always brought back rationales or motivations to their children. And so needed to make sure that that was included in all intervention aspects and messaging. And so again, design principles are meant for the design team, and you would get there after doing a lot of the homework in the inspiration and ideation phases. And so before we keep going and specifically frame 2 activities that you all will try this week, I know that that was a lot of information. And so would love to hear what questions you have at this point.
Is creating the design principles, is that typically like a collaborative process between the end user and everyone else involved, or should it be primarily led by the end user? It's not like in this case, it sounds like it's sort of primarily led by the end user, but it's phrased from the perspective of the researchers or the developers.
Yeah, great question. I would say that this activity should be completed by the design team, but it needs to be heavily informed by all the activities that are done in partnership with the end users. And so this one really is an accountability activity for people who are in the position of power of designing and suggesting the intervention or solution. But you would only get there after you've meaningfully engaged in inspiration and other ideation activities with real people.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, maybe from your own projects and experiences, how long, you've taken with the divergent and convergent, all of the ideation that you've done, and kind of what's a reasonable expectation that we should set for ourselves to do that sort of work.
Yeah, and I will own that we really struggled, and this is something that I struggle with capping the amount of time to dedicate, because you could diverge and converge endlessly. And so we know that that's not great with time-bound projects. And so I would give yourself a few weeks. So I don't think it's enough to do it in a few days. However, if you've gone through multiple rounds of divergent and convergent thinking, I think 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 weeks is probably the max that you would want before you go into implementation, knowing that even if you go into implementation, you might learn something or find something out that tips you back into more rounds of divergent and convergent. And so there's not a perfect timeline and formula, because everybody's project will progress differently, but I do think that you should hold a few weeks to do both divergent and convergent thinking and hold yourself accountable to move on at some point, but give yourself the grace and flexibility that if you went down a path and in your implementation phase really hit a snag and what you thought was going to work really isn't landing, to not necessarily just push forward at that moment for the sake of pushing forward, but to go back and do some more understanding work.
Thank you.
Yeah, Will or Julie?
I'm good, thanks.
Cool. All right. As you go through and look at some more of these methods and resources online, again, we encourage you to reach back out to me and to Emily so that we can walk you through and to help you visualize how you might integrate these methods into your own work. It does take practice. And so again, I'm going to tee up 2 activities that we will start today and then have you all work through individually or in teams in the coming week. So the first one is a journey map, and this is a great divergent thinking tool. And so a journey map allows you to identify and strategize for key moments in a product, experience, or service. It can track decisions, behaviors, or feelings, and it's really up to you which of these aspects you want to map out. And so I've included 2 examples in the slide deck. Again, you'll get these slide decks, so you will be able to walk yourself through this. But here is a customer journey map from Starbucks. And you have baseline and then enriched experience, which I think is a positive experience. And then what they have termed as a poached experience, which we think is a negative experience. And then along the bottom, there are different touch points and phases. And so there's the anticipate phase, the enter the store phase, the engage with staff phase, the exiting, and then the reflecting. And they actually went so far as to break it down even further into different specific touch points. And then it looks like what they did was they put dots either above or below baseline that include feelings or factors or moments. And so again, a customer journey map is very flexible and should be tailored to what you were interested in tracking. But based on what you see here, what are some of your initial reactions to Starbucks customer journey map?
So let's, I think this is, this looks interesting. I just had a question. How do you do that when you don't have customers and more like patients or other people, surgeons? So what would I have to consider, I guess?
Yeah, and so the word customer here can be used very broadly. Starbucks is actually talking about a Starbucks customer, but as we talk about it, we're talking about any of the end users or stakeholder groups. And so for you, Julie, you can think about physicians and then essentially do the same activity and think about when would physicians hear about your solution? When might they, or how might they gain access to your solution? What is their experience using your solution? And then what is the experience after using your solution? And so it doesn't have to be your end user all the time. There might be other important stakeholders who you would want to map out a journey map for, but for the purposes of the coming week, we would like you to pick what you would define as an end user. And so, Julie, I think for you, it would be a clinician.
And then,
yeah, Will.
So what determines then the x-axis? So what's, so is it up to a point of sale? Is it through the experience, through the destruction or return of the life of the thing that you bought? Or does it matter?
It's up to you. The guidance that we put in the template that you will use does start at the awareness level and then go through what we just generally call post-experience. And so a lot of times, many of us focus really narrowly on the actual tech or actual solution or intervention. And sometimes we forget that there's, in the real world, somebody has to hear about the solution or intervention, and there might be a period of trying it and accessing it before the actual intervention experience itself. And then afterwards, it's also really important to understand how people make decisions about whether they want to use your intervention or solution again or not. And so as long as you are including before using your solution, the actual experience of using your solution, and something after, that'll be sufficient for the activity that you have this week.
And then my other question then in this example, are these just dots that they've put in, or is this based on some data that they're extracting, or what, how did they decide on how far up and down those dots would be?
Yeah, I am not sure how Starbucks came to put this together. I am inferring that they took data from somewhere, from real customers, and then probably asked them what the most influential factors were, and then tried to put them relative to each other. But I'm not on the Starbucks team and did not see added context for that. And so again, as you all put your journey maps together, you are likely going to do it without a whole bunch of data. And these are not meant to be static. And so you can constantly adjust them and or ask other team members to create their own journey maps so that you can compare, because, well, you might have conceptualized that these are the important points and this is what makes each of those points important or good or bad or happy or not happy, but your teammates might have a different understanding. And so it's a good tool just for different team members to create so that you have something to generate further conversation with. And then just wanted to show another example that you will get in the slide deck, but shopping for a new car. We know that that's not always super fun, but wanted to show this example where it does tease out different aspects of the process that isn't the only buying the new car piece. And so this one really focuses on all the front end decision making, but there's the consider phase, the explore phase, the compare phase, the test phase before the negotiate phase. And this one broke it down in terms of actions towards the top. And then they mapped out the emotional journey. And you can see this like roller coaster loop at compare. And then they actually inserted things that customers might say at each of these different phases. And so again, this is a different format and is still a journey map. And Julie, for you, it says customer, but again, you could just insert this for user or clinician journey map. And similar to the other ones, there's no right or wrong journey map. And so all 5 of you will likely come up with different looking maps. But the important thing is you've thought about the different phases and not just whatever your solution is. And I've started to think through not just the behaviors, but potentially the different factors or the different feelings, in this case, the emotions and quotes that users might have along different time points. And so I'm gonna just give you all a couple minutes just to look at the template that we put together for you to work on in the next week. And again, I will offer office hours to walk through this with you if that is helpful. And so you will get a Jamboard and I will pull up what it looks like on my end. And so I will send out this link with the summary email, but again, each of you has your own assigned journey map. And broadly, there are several different phases that we would like you to think through. So awareness of your idea or solution, support or how you would access your service or solution, the actual service or intervention experience, and then the post experience. And then we did not prescribe any other axes for you. And so you might be really interested in listing out the behaviors or the feelings or going through and using a line to chart the emotional journey. It is entirely up to you, but the important point for us is that you've thought about some of the before aspects like awareness. How do people hear about the idea to begin with? How might people access, purchase, subscribe to your service or solution? What is the experience like for the user if they're using your solution? And then the post experience. So after they're done using your solution or service, what happens then and how did they feel? And so again, this is meant for you all to start a conversation amongst your team members and for you to do some individual reflection. And then we will use these to inform the activities next week. And again, I'm available for office hours, but we'll pause here to see if folks have any questions about this. I will add that folks who've done this have really enjoyed leveraging the colors of the sticky notes. And so some people like to use blue for all the actions, pink for all the emotions, and then move things relative to each other. And so it's up to you, but remember that you do have the ability to draw and add stickies. You can also add images. And so you don't only have to use Post-it notes as you go through and do this activity.
Sorry, I was going to ask real quick. By support, you mean support by the company interacting to the stakeholder? Is that?
Yeah, and so how might they gain access or gain support to start using whatever it is that is your intervention or solution?
No, I see. Okay.
And again, this is your first attempt, and so this is not a final product. It's not meant to be, but it's meant to have you at least start thinking about the whole journey and not just the solution in isolation. And then after that, I think that it'll probably take you between 15 and 30 minutes to put together a solid journey map for your project. Then want you to spend another 15 to 30 minutes completing this determine what to prototype activity. And so you're going to review your journey map, and then if you already have, based on focus group findings or other data sets, any other insight statements, criteria, or design principles, we're going to ask you to complete the prototype mapping worksheet on the subsequent slide, and then review your prototyping options and reflect on the following questions. So what are the most crucial moments or shifts within your journey to be addressed? Which concepts are so exciting that you absolutely have to test them in real life? And where have you got the biggest unknowns? And so here is the empty template. And so the top 3 look very similar to what we're asking you to populate in your own journey map, but just map out the most important moments and milestones in your user's journey. And then what shift do you want to see in this moment? And then the last thing, we want you to ideate on your own. Once you've identified the shift you want to see at each of those different phases, consider and put forth 4 or more solutions that would actually address that desired behavioral shift that you want to see. And so for an example, IDEO again was working with girls and trying to connect them with contraceptive services in a different country. And so generally you have girls and they hear or learn about the contraceptive service, and then they're supported in some way in accessing those actual contraceptive services, and then they receive youth-friendly contraceptive services. And so after they've identified those 3 different points, they ask themselves, what shift do you want to see in each of those different moments? And so the first one, girls need a way to learn about contraception in an environment that feels safe and does not out her. And so after that's been decided that that is something that needs to shift for awareness, then they went through and thought through what are some ways that that could actually be achieved. So their team came up with a hip radio program, a fashion show with sexually and reproductive health info, a teen magazine, or one-on-one peer counseling. And so that is the logic of how they figured that out per that column. And so for support and access, they knew based on their empathy work, their inspiration, and early ideation activities that parents and male partners should not be left out of conversations about the importance of contraceptive services for girls. And so ways to address that could include parent meetups, boys clubs, values clarification game of some sort. And then lastly, they want girls to receive youth-friendly contraceptive services. In order to get there, the shift is healthcare providers need to put their personal feelings and biases aside when providing contraceptive counseling to girls. And so how might that be achieved? Provider trainings, counseling tools, values clarification game again. So again, this, in terms of order, we recommend that you flesh out your journey map first for 15-30 minutes. And then from there, translate some of that content here, and then get to the point where you are identifying the shifts you want to see at each of the different phases, and either individually or with your team, brainstorming solutions that actually address the shifts that you want to see. And again, we think that this will take 15-30 minutes for you to start, knowing that you will not finish. And then in the Google Jamboard, each of you has an actual blank board that looks like this. And so you can go through and just put Post-it notes in each of the boxes. And so I'll put this button back up. What questions do folks have about this activity?
At the point where you have the 4 solution concepts at the bottom, is that still part of kind of converging down to a single target, or are those all things that you then intend to prototype as part of the prototyping phase?
Yeah, and so at this point, you would we would encourage you to prototype many of these different ideas, and you wouldn't prototype full-fledged hip radio programs in the next phase, but you would start to prototype elements of each so that you can figure out what is working better and keep what's working better at the forefront as you move forward.
Great.
Others, I see wheels turning, which is great.
For the solution concepts, I know we're brainstorming those, but I guess our team's also looking here specifically to the evidence, the literature, what's been used in the past, and sort of combining, where are people coming up with solutions, I guess is the question.
Yeah, not, again, there's no right or wrong answer, but typically people are triangulating what best practices and evidence is shown with all of the findings from their inspiration and early ideation activities. And so would caution you not only to look at the peer reviewed literature and what's been done and what's been published, but making sure that you are capturing ideas put forth in those earlier phases of design thinking. Yeah, okay, so I want to honor time, and so we are at time. And again, I will send out a brief summary email later today with instructions for next time, and then the link to my Calendly if you would like to schedule time in the next week to workshop this with me. And this is a lot of new content and new ways of thinking, but would at least like to give you some structure and some guidance as you all try some of these on your own and then maybe with your teams. And so let us know what support we can offer you, but appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer questions if you want to stay on for a few more minutes, or if you want to hop on office hours with me.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.
You're welcome. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you. Thumbs up.
You're welcome. Bye.
I'm already doing the next call, so it's like I'm